Well, thank you, everyone, and good morning, and welcome to PRI's 7th annual, I can't believe it's 7th annual, California Ideas in Action Conference. I'm Tim Anaya. I'm PRI's Vice President of Marketing Communications, and I'm your moderator today. And we're thrilled that you could all join us today to hear really some of the best free market thinkers and real-life change makers in California discussing our state's many challenges and how free market ideas really provide the answer for reforms to improve the lives for all Californians. Now, on a personal note today, I'm thrilled to have had the chance just recently to co-author my very first book, the California Left Coast Survivor's Guide. All of you have copies of the book in your bag, so I hope you enjoy it. And it's, well, really, we live through all the problems, right, that we have in our state, but it's really a humorous look at the challenges that we have to live through these days, calling our once golden state home. We even made our own poop map in the book as well. Now, I don't know about you, but when you watch TV at night and you kind of see everything, you kind of get upset and you can't believe, how did it get this way? Well, my book is kind of written in the spirit of, well, I'd rather laugh about some of these things, hopefully, than get upset about all these things that we're going to talk about today. And I really do think that humor is a pretty powerful way to change things. So, in that spirit, I hope that you'll sit back and enjoy the day. You're all going to learn a lot in 4 hours. Don't worry, there won't be a quiz at the end. So to kick off our day, I'd like to bring up PRI's President, CEO, and Thomas W. Smith Fellow in Healthcare Policy, and the author of a new book herself, Sally Pipes. Sally, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Sorry. Well, good morning and welcome to everyone. I wanted first just a couple of things. One, I wanted to thank Tim and Anaya for doing such a marvelous job in pulling this event together. Great speakers, not including myself, but all the great speakers, all the great work. And Matt Fleming from our office in Sacramento and Laura Dannerbeck have also been tremendous helps in getting our 7th annual conference together. So they deserve a round of applause for their hard work. And at each of your places, you will find the Napa Valley Retreat PRI is having April 4 to 6 at the Meritage Resort in Napa. Katie Lynn has already signed up for it, and I hope many of you will. We have Steve Forbes as our Saturday evening dinner speaker. We have Gordon Chang Friday night for dinner. Steve Hilton, who it looks like he's going to announce his run for the governorship. He's speaking at lunch on Saturday. We have some great panels. So we have Nathan Hochman, the new DA for Los Angeles, who I think is going to do some great things. So we've got a great Friday night till Sunday midday retreat for you. So I hope you'll all consider joining us, because it's going to be a wonderful event. So anyway, thank you again, Tim, and thank all of you for joining us at our Ideas in Action conference. We're so pleased that we've had such a great turnout. Every year it seems we get more people. So I don't know, when we've been doing this for 50 years, we'll have to rent a larger spot. And we're gathering together this year, as we do, in the immediate aftermath of the horrific Southern California fires. I'm pleased that PRI is based in Pasadena, and none of us, Rowena or any of our staff, was actually affected by the fires, because we all live south of the 210 freeway. But really, so many of our friends and associates, friends and colleagues in other places have lost their homes and lost everything. So it's very, very, very sad, and it's going to be a slow rebuild. But Californians are strong, and we will come back. We have a front row seat to the devastation brought by the fires, and especially the tremendous losses experienced by our neighbors in Altadena. I know Valerie grew up in Altadena when she was very young, and she thought that her house is probably burned down like most have, so really terrible. But seeing Californians coming together to help their friends and people they don't even know is a reminder that California can deal with reform, and we're very optimistic about that. A state of generosity, collaboration, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and community spirit will bring us all together. But just as inspiring as Californians can be in times of crisis, government can be callous. We've all been frustrated to read of the many instances of where government, including state and local politicians, have failed the people of our state. Going forward, government policy, unless changed, will make the rebuilding process more difficult and even more expensive. We have seen Governor Newsom use his executive powers to put some certain regulations on hold, which our board member Dan Kolke has been telling Rowena and myself about, and actually he has gone ahead with CEQA, the Air Resources Board, and many building mandates. And let's hope that these all become permanent changes, not just in the wake of the fires. Compounding the destruction is a state insurance crisis that has been allowed to fester by inaction. If anyone who's studied economics would know, insurance rates should be tied to risk, not charging everyone the same regardless of the risk. And we must not forget the ongoing challenges that, if reforms are not made, will once again delay the rebuilding of water supplies through the construction of new reservoirs in this state. We've been talking about it, we've been hammering on it, and they keep saying yes, but it never happens. It's got to happen, and these fires really show us why it's so important that we build new reservoirs when we do have a rainy season, like last Thursday when it poured rain. The state budget deficit is also a problem. California needs to cut the size of this government. California is facing great challenges at a time of major positive reforms taking place nationally under a new administration in Washington. While some see the reforms as controversial in style and action, the second Trump administration is pursuing refreshing and long overdue reforms to cut the size of government and bring the budget under control, to put an end to unnecessary and costly regulations and government mandates, many of which were inspired from bad California policies. We used to say, as goes California, so goes the nation. Well, we don't want the nation copying things, and I'm very excited that some of the changes that are being made in Washington, and I think they'll have positive impacts on the state of California. So we need to end business as usual in Washington. At this time of challenge and change, we're gathering, as I mentioned, for our 7th annual conference here in Sacramento, where we talk about bold ideas, free market solutions, and they are needed the most here in the state capitol. As PRI's Rowena Ishon wrote in the foreword to Tim's new book, The California Left Coast Survivor's Guide, which you all have been given copies of, Rowena said, "We at PRI love this state, and we want to restore the opportunity for all 40 million of our residents and friends and neighbors to achieve the California dream." That's why I came to California in 1991, to pursue the California dream. Despite Sacramento's worst efforts, there are still those of us left with, as Mark Twain spoke of, stout hearts and willing hands, and who share the bravest dreams of her visionaries. Today, we will discuss reforms that will bring us closer to that dream. This year, we're going to have a series of big conversations. Everyone's talking about, everything's big these days, so we're gonna have big conversations. You'll hear from real-life change-makers, great thinkers, and policy experts exploring how market-based solutions provide the path forward to reform and renewal. And I'll be pleased to share my thoughts on why the push by Democrats and some Republicans to enact government price controls on prescription drugs will hurt patients and harm innovation. And these are the things that are in the subject of my new book, The World's Medicine Chest, which Tim mentioned. During our lunch today, I'm excited that Rowena was able to get the nationwide pollster, Scott Rasmussen, to come and talk to us about his thoughts on where the nation is going. And we're going to kick off our 2025 conference with Dr. Wayne Winegarden. Wayne, who's going to do the discussion with me on price controls, but he's going to talk, he's our Senior Fellow in Business and Economics, and he's going to talk about his upcoming study on California's green mandates. And you're going to be totally shocked at how much those mandates cost. Wayne, welcome to the podium.
Good morning. All right, so I think Sally overstated what I'm going to be able to do, because Tim has confined me to 5 minutes. So I'm not going to be able to talk about much, unfortunately. And it's actually dangerous because you get me talking about environmental policies. I could drone on. Tim's getting nervous there, so I won't. But and then we'll have our conversation about with Sally's new book. We've been tracking what's been happening in terms of environmental policies, really global climate change policies here in the state. And we're trying to take it from the perspective of, does this work? Can you actually do the policies that they're saying we need to do? So the first study that we did, and you have a little one-pager in your handouts, the first one we did was called ZAPT. And I don't come up with the names, I come up with very boring names, and Tim makes them interesting. But we came up with ZAPT. And what we tried to do in ZAPT is, how much extra are we paying as Californians? And this was back in 2020. And what we actually found was, because of our environmental policies, because of our global climate change policies, the average household is spending about $1,400 to $2,100 on electricity, which is 51% higher than the rest of the country, 51% higher. And that if we changed our policies, we could save over $500 a year. I mean, that's incredible. So we said, okay, are these policies going to hurt us financially as consumers? And the answer was undoubtedly yes. Okay. So then we said, okay, if the policies are going to make electricity more expensive, can we actually do it? Right? I mean, is the plans coming out of the halls across the way feasible? And that was the second study that we looked at, Sapping California's Energy Future. And that was about a year ago. Carrie Jackson and I co-wrote that. And what we did is we said, okay, if past is prologue, right, we've been going at this for a long time, and we've been building all sorts of wind turbines. We've been putting up solar facilities. I bought a house 3 years ago. It was brand new. We had to put solar panels on. I mean, we've been doing this for a while. We have experience. So at the rate that we've been putting on kind of all this new technology, and we've been shutting down all of our resources, can we generate enough electricity? And we also included the EV mandates. So we're going to have growth in electricity use, and we're going to have new EV mandates. That's going to increase electricity use. We included those. We didn't include all of the impacts from the electric stoves and electric heaters. And we really weren't sure how to get that in. And we didn't worry about the most important issue when it comes to electric grids, which is you have to balance it. Right? When you turn on that switch, that electricity needs to turn on. When you put the stove on, if it's an electric stove, it needs to turn on. And so that's incredibly important. And what that means is electricity delivered at 7 p.m. isn't the same product as electricity delivered at 4 a.m. or at noon. And we didn't worry about balancing in that way, which is essential. So if you just take that one basic threshold, can we have the capacity to do it? And the answer is no. Okay. You're going to be about 21% short of capacity based on how much we've been building. So that's actually a really kind of scary thought. So it's going to increase prices, and we're going to have shortages. And that's kind of a really bad statement on where we're going with our electric system. And in this latest brief that we're coming out, hopefully within the next month, we kind of took one last kind of look at it, and we said, okay, let's assume we can build it. So ignore what we just did. We know we can't, but let's assume we can. Because one thing we don't see as part of the conversation is, how much is this going to cost? And the answer is a lot. So what we did, first we figured out what we could quantify and what we can't quantify. And once again, there's lots of costs that we can't quantify. But if you look at the cost we can quantify, so that's, how much is it going to cost to build all these offshore wind turbines and onshore wind turbines, and all these battery facilities. And by the way, I live in Monterey, California, about 8 miles away from the Moss plant that fired, so that was kind of terrifying. But we're going to put lots more of these battery electric farms all across the state. And that's going to cost us about $170 billion. Yeah, $170 billion just to build all that infrastructure. But we're not done, because now we have to decommission all of these sites, all the natural gas plants and nuclear plants. That costs a lot of money. It's another $18 billion. Now we also have to dispose of all of this new, right? They say we're going to harness the sun, harness the wind. No, not really. What we're going to do is we're going to dig up resources out of the earth, we're going to use it, and then we have to dispose of it. It's just like fossil fuels. But we have to dispose of it. That's another $5 billion. So you put all this together, and you're talking about somewhere between $192 and $230 billion. Now, a little technical, that's the present value, right? Because this is going to be spent over the years, so we kind of discounted it. So basically think of it as, if we took $200 billion and put it in the bank today, earned 2.5% interest on it, we'd have enough money to build out. And what we're talking about is about $14,000 to $18,000 per household. Right? So if it took $14,000 from everybody in this room, put it in a bank and went around the state and did the same thing, we'd have enough money to build out the grid, which is just, an insane number. Oh, and by the way, we still haven't accounted for the fact that we're, in technical terms, stranding assets, right? All these perfectly good plants you have to shut down, there's a cost to that. We're gonna have a problem of, obviously, the higher costs, right? We're gonna have lost opportunities. Sally was talking about fires. If we're spending money on new power plants, we're not spending money fortifying the current system. So, and by the way, we're running lots more electricity lines, because wind blows where it blows, not necessarily where we need it. So we need new distribution and transmission lines to get them to where there is. And there's also a problem of environmental damage, right? Not just battery fires in electric vehicles, not just battery fires at the farms, but solar plants create all sorts of environmental damage. Wind turbines create environmental damage. All of these costs we couldn't quantify, but are no less real. So the bottom line from the study, and I'm probably running out of time, is that it's incredibly costly for us to go down this path that is probably not possible, is going to raise our rates, and then the kicker of all of it is we're not going to do a darn thing in terms of reducing emissions. So this is all symbolic policies, not really changing anything. And I feel so dour. I feel like the energy in the room is going down because I have nothing but bad news. But I think stating the bad news, let's end optimistically. I think stating the bad news, it gives us something to push back with, to say that we don't need to go down this path. This doesn't make sense. Sally was talking about what's happening in DC right now, and our electric vehicle mandates, right? Those are actually possibly, likely, whatever you want to say, might be rolled back. Our EV truck mandates, that may not happen. So I think there is optimism, and getting the bad news out, while it feels very kind of dour, I think there's a certain optimism about it, because it gives us something to push back and avoid that future. And that, I think, is kind of a much happier place to end. And so I guess with that, Sally and I are going to talk about her new book, which, okay, now we've changed locations. I'm wearing a different hat now. But what we really want to talk about, and Sally and I both spend a lot of time looking at the healthcare system, looking at drug pricing, all of the different issues. And drug pricing is really scary because it's something that matters so much. It is so impactful. And it's something that people think they understand, and they absolutely don't. And that's scary because it's something that it impacts our lives. And we need to understand this better, and we need to fix it. And so Sally's book, I think, does a fantastic job in a very kind of layman's term explaining kind of what's going on. And I guess...
Hold the mic really close to you.
Oh, is that better?
That's better.
I apologize. Okay. And I guess I'd like to start with a very kind of broad question to Sally in terms of why did she write this book, and what did she hope to achieve?
Well, thank you, Wayne, and I'm delighted to be here and talk about it. There's that great famous statement, the problem with the world ain't ignorance, it's the things people know that just ain't so. And I think this is very, very important in the whole pharmaceutical debate. And Wayne and I have been working on this for several years, and as many of you know, I come from Canada, and I worked at the Fraser Institute, and we started in 1988 a project called Waiting Your Turn, a guide to waiting lists, because the government had fully taken over the healthcare system in 1984, and we found out waits were happening. And so I've been possessed with moving to the US and being able to save our healthcare system from a takeover by the government. There are many people, even some Republicans, who would like to see us all have a government-run healthcare system and no private coverage at all. So, Wayne, I'm just passionate about this. It's my life's goal is, before I die, not to have a government takeover of our healthcare system. And of course, I hope that won't be anytime soon. So, market capitalism in 2020, when COVID came, it was the United States that developed, Pfizer and Moderna developed the vaccines, and by December 8th of 2020, 70% of the world had been vaccinated, had at least one vaccination. And of course, at that time, the pharmaceutical industry was like a rising star. Everyone was very excited. But it didn't take long for people to start saying, oh, the pharmaceutical industry is evil. And this culminated in August of 2022, when President Biden signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act, which did not reduce inflation. And part of that act, as Wayne was saying, was price controls on drugs under Medicare, starting with Medicare Part D. So here we are in on January 2026. The first 10 drugs under Medicare Part D will be subject to price controls, and this will move forward through 2029. And of course, a lot of people on the left, progressives in particular, would like to see a lot more drugs under price control. So I'm passionate about this, and that's why I wrote the book, because I thought, people don't understand it. It's hard for us sometimes to understand it. We're always being thrown new phrases. And so I wanted to try and educate the American people on what is really behind research and development and innovation, and why it takes place in America today and not in countries like Europe where it used to take place.
And that's actually a really great point, if we can, I guess, go off of the innovation angle. And I think something that's underappreciated, which is what is the benefit to the U.S. for being, as you put it, the world medicine chest?
Right. Well, so if you go back to the 1970s, most of the innovation and research and development was done by companies in Germany, in the UK, in France. If you look at companies that you all know the names of here, if you take any drugs, Novartis, Roche, AstraZeneca, GlaxoSmithKline, those were all European countries. And as I say, in the 70s, they were the innovators. But as things happened, after World War II, governments started to get more involved in healthcare. And as you saw, if you probably realize, in 1948, the British government started the National Health Service. They took over the British healthcare system. Fortunately for Brits, they are allowed to have private coverage. You'll see that the royal family, when they have surgeries and treatments, they don't use the National Health Service. But anyway, the waiting times are even longer in Britain than they are in Canada. The average Canadian today waits over 30 weeks from seeing a primary care doctor to getting treatment by a specialist. So, and I have many family members who have been subject to, and friends, been subject to this. So at the end of World War II, governments, France, Germany, and the UK, the government started taking over the healthcare system. And then by the year 2004, all of these countries had price controls on pharmaceuticals. And so these companies that I just mentioned decided, well, we can't make these drugs, we can't do the R&D and bring them to market when there are price controls in effect. And people don't realize that it costs about $2.8 billion to bring a drug from an idea to bring it to your CVS pharmacy. It takes 12 years to get through the clinical trial process, all the early trials, the later trials, and only 1 in 10 drugs actually makes it to market. So it's a very expensive industry, and we are now, 80% of research and development in the pharmaceutical sector is done in the United States today, and 2/3 of all new drugs are developed in this country. So if you look at Canada, where I'm from, as I talked about waiting times, on any given day, between 1,500 and 2,000 drugs are in shortage. And according to RAND, last point, according to RAND, between 2018 and 2022, the United States had 74% of the new drugs produced were available in the US. In Canada, it was only 28% of those drugs are available to Canadians, and 44% in the UK. So price controls came in very, very quickly, starting in the 70s, in the 40s, the 70s, and now today. And so now we are fighting, how do we not allow this price control movement to take over? And that's what Wayne and I are putting our finger in the dike for.
I guess following up on that, I think it'd be useful to talk about how do price controls impact innovation? I mean, and what's the importance of innovation, and why do we need to worry about it?
Well, I think we need to worry about it because innovation is so important. I mean, back in the day, I mean, if you had a gallbladder attack, you had to go to the hospital and you had surgery, and then you had to recover, and maybe you didn't do so well with the anesthetic. So there's the pharmaceutical industry and the biologic industry have done so much to allow people not to have to go through expensive and costly surgeries, allowing people to continue to work and make a living rather than being at home being ill, and so not being able to work. So innovation is such an important part of our future, and we want to keep it that way. I say to people, well, if the government, the Biden government for sure, and Newsom and all these people want to end the market capitalism and things, if that happens, where will the American pharmaceutical companies go to do their work? Are they going to go to Venezuela? Hardly. So we want to keep this alive and well so that we can be alive and well.
And something that I'm not sure people recognize, I mean, that often you talk about drug affordability and they talk about patients, and not recognizing that patients are actually waiting for these innovations. There's so many diseases that we can't treat, and that's a terrifying figure. This is not an issue of a faceless company versus patients who need their medicines. This is, how do we get the most patients the medicine they need, whether it's a medicine that we can treat, a disease we can treat, or a disease that we can't treat. And I guess, toward that, there's a huge difference between our access to medicines here in the US, where we don't have price controls, versus the type of access you have in Canada and the UK. I was hoping you could speak to that as well.
Right, exactly. So I mentioned that, between 2018 and 2022, only in the US, 74% of the new drugs were available to us, and in Canada, 28%. So I have many friends who, have cancer, various debilitating other diseases, and the drugs that are available here, they can't even get because they don't make it on the formulary. Canada, for example, has the Patented Medicines Prices Review Board, and when an American company produces a drug and then it goes to Canada, the Patented Medicines Prices Review Board decides at the price that the drug company discounted price is offering, they decide whether it's going to be good enough to send out to each of the provinces so they can put it on the formulary. And as I say, at any one time there's a shortage between 1,500 and 2,000 drugs. And the availability of these drugs in Canada is very low. NICE is the organization in the UK under the National Health Service, and it's not NICE at all. NICE is the National Institutes of Health and Clinical Excellence. They have a phrase they call QALY, Quality Adjusted Life Value. So NICE decides that if Wayne at his age is worth, what we pay him, $50,000 a year, no, that's not true. If Wayne is worth $50,000 a year, but Sally, who is the CEO of the Eli Lilly company, has a drug that is going to help him, and it's going to cost $60,000 a year, well, NICE will say it's not worth, his quality adjusted life value is not worth it, so the drug is not available to him. These are the kinds of things that are happening around the world and that we don't want to happen. There's actually a group in Massachusetts called ICER, the Institute for Clinical Economic Review, and they're trying to copy what NICE is doing, and so we have to keep, so Wayne writes papers against ICER explaining to people what a terrible organization that is and why we don't want that either.
Yeah, no, this is a private group that's decided it's in their purview to control what drugs you have access to, and they have the self-righteousness to believe that's an okay mission for them. But I'm going to say something that might be shocking here, but people like Bernie Sanders or AOC, they have a point when they talk about drug prices. I mean, there is something wrong. Yes. And you talk about that in the book as well, which is probably worthwhile discussing.
Well, I was about to mention Senator Bernie Sanders, the former chair of the Senate Help Committee. So he is not at the top anymore, but I call him the Pied Piper of single-payer healthcare because he has devoted his whole life to having the government take over our healthcare system. But in addition to that, his other issue is pharmaceutical prices and getting price controls on pharmaceuticals. So Bernie Sanders gets up on the stump and he said, well, American people are being screwed. If you take the blood clot medicine from Bristol Myers Squibb Pfizer, it's a joint venture, Eliquis, which reduces blood clots and allows people to live normal lives. You'll be paying $690 a month. Well, what Bernie Sanders doesn't tell the people, that is a list price. This is an area of real expertise for Wayne. That is a list price for that drug. Very few people in this country pay the list price. They pay the net price, the rebated, discounted price for these drugs. So if you If you have health insurance through your employer, 170 million Americans do, you probably have pharmaceutical coverage. And so you will get, we can talk about later the role of the PBMs, the pharmaceutical benefit manager middlemen, but you pay a small portion of that price, maybe $20 a month. So very few people pay what Bernie Sanders tells the American people, the list price. They pay the net price. And a friend of ours who was diagnosed with leukemia last fall, so he is on some very expensive drugs and injections in Boston. And but because of the drugs to build up his red blood corpuscles, his white corpuscles are declining, so he is on an injection for Granix. And he gets his statement from Medicare saying each injection $5,000, twice a week $10,000, $40,000 a month. But that is what comes on a statement. But between his Medicare coverage and his Medicare supplemental, he pays zero. So, that really, we have to educate people on what the difference between the list price and the net price, and the role of some of the evil people who are keeping the drug prices high from us. And that's one of two. 340B and PBMs are Wayne's specialty, and I free ride off his ideas.
That's not true. I guess, but so toward this, what would the solutions be? I mean, we know so list prices don't matter, right? They're just these artificial numbers that make great political statements, but don't actually reflect the costs. So how can we reform the system?
Well, I think one of the things that is, and maybe it's too early to talk about it, is the whole issue of trade. And when a drug when a company first files that patent till the drug becomes available to you, that property, intellectual property, is protected for 20 years. And of course, many progressives want to have that eliminated so the drugs would be free. But when a drug comes off patent, it can be copied exactly as a generic. 90% of drugs consumed in this country are generic drugs. They're knockoffs, whether it's for cholesterol, atorvastatin, or whatever. They're generic. So there's the whole issue of trade. Why should a country like England and Canada and Germany, they all free ride off our R&D? We produce it, we bear the cost, and then we bear the cost, and then they free ride. And so these countries that have price controls need to start paying their fair share. And Donald Trump has talked about that, so I'm excited about that. The other issue is, I talked in the beginning about the price controls under IRA, August 2022. The first 10 Medicare Part D drugs come in January 1st, 2026. The second 15 drugs under Medicare Part D come into effect on January 1st, 2027. I am hoping that President Trump will talk to Congress and try to convince them to put the IRA price controls on hold, but more important, I'd rather they are repealed when they can be, because as Milton Friedman used to say to me, Sally, tell me a government program that has ever been discontinued. Very hard to get rid of. So we want to make sure that happens, and we want to expose to people the role of the pharmaceutical benefit managers and how they put the price up so they can make more money for themselves, the PBM, and for the insurance company. And the consumer should be getting those discounted prices when they go to Walgreens or CVS or their local store.
It seems that we had time for one question before we go to audience questions. So if you could kind of expound more on the PBMs and how they're actually not just increasing list prices, but because of co-insurance, they transfer some costs to patients.
Yes, exactly. So when I do a lot of media on this stuff, and I say to the host, I bet you don't talk about PBMs at your dinner table or the 340B program, because these are complicated issues. But the pharmaceutical benefit managers, there are three firms that control 80% of the PBM market. One is Express Scripts, it's owned by Cigna. The other is CVS Caremark, which is owned by CVS Corporation, and the third one is Optum, which is part of United Health. These are the evil companies, the evil PBMs that are keeping the costs up and not passing on the savings to us, the consumer. And there is bipartisan interest and support for letting people know the role of the PBM and how negative it is. And really, PBMs should just be paid a basic cost, and so they aren't able to sort of do discounts and rebates that maximize what they're going to get in their return.
Absolutely. So we have time for questions.
Hi, Sally. What are your thoughts about GLP-1 inhibitors? And my concern is that if Medicaid and Medicare cover those at anywhere near the list price, our country is going to go bankrupt.
Well, so GLP-1s are what is that word? I can never pronounce it.
Semaglutide.
Yeah, yes, which are in drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, what's the other one? Mounjaro. Yeah, so those are the GLPs, and so the government, the HHS and the FDA do not want these drugs to be on the Medicare and the Medicaid formulary. And Wayne and I agree that they should be, so that patients who have problems with obesity can get access to these drugs at a lower price than they can afford them. And so we're pushing in op-eds to get the government to get Medicare and Medicaid to include them on the formulary. And so, and not only are the GLP-1s and these drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, they are actually now finding that they're very helpful in discovering and curing other ailments that people have. That is one of the exciting things about the pharmaceutical industry, is that in many cases a drug is developed to treat this thing, but they find off-patent uses for cancer reform and various things. So,
yeah. And I would add one thing, I guess, directly to your question, which is, you're not going to get Wegovy, or shouldn't be covered for cosmetic reasons. If you need to lose 10 pounds because you want to look better for the beach, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people with clinical obesity. And diabetes. And what you actually find is, if you are on these medicines, then you need fewer surgeries, you have fewer complications, you need fewer hospital stays. And so the way the government counts for it, your Part D spending might be higher, but your overall net spending on Medicare, the evidence shows is going to be lower. And even if it were higher, people are going to be healthier, which is part of the goal. But the costs, A, aren't nearly as high as they intend, and B, the costs don't take into account, when they project out the costs, Sally was talking about patent life. And they project out the cost as if you're going to be spending on a branded medicine for the rest, of it being on the market, and that's not true. In about 10 years, you're going to have generic versions, or I think it's a biologic, so you have biosimilars competing, and you'll see prices drop by 50% or more. So at that point, you'll really have the benefit of kind of those lower costs and the improved outcomes.
And I've been trying to lose 10 pounds for 10 years, and it's impossible. So,
Tim says we have time for one more question.
What's your perspective on RFK's view of vaccines? Not to ban them, but he states that there's not enough research data on some of the vaccines that have been approved.
well, if he actually knew how difficult it was to get a vaccine through the FDA, and I'm hoping that Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins is going to be the new head, confirmed as the new head of the FDA, because he's a very smart chap. I don't think, when people understand the complicated process and how, as I said, only 1 in 10 drugs makes it through, and vaccines are part of the same process. They did Operation Warp Speed during COVID to get us that vaccine, which, as I mentioned, 70% of the world got their first shot from the vaccine. RFK Jr., many of my friends who are doctors, not counting the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post and many other media outlets, many of my doctor friends are very concerned about what he's going to do. And if he, as Secretary of HHS, I don't know if you saw, but the Wall Street Journal said he'll probably be the first secretary in the cabinet to be removed from his position. So we'll see if he and Mr. Musk get into a fight or whatever. But anyway, the vaccines, very hard to get through. We eradicated, starting back in the 1700s, Dr. Jenner in the UK discovered the smallpox vaccine. We've had the polio vaccine. We've had penicillin. All of these, so many drugs, so many of these vaccines have eradicated illnesses like smallpox, polio, measles, mumps. I don't know if you've been watching the news, but there's been an outbreak of measles in Texas, and all of the 75 children who have measles, some are ending up in hospital, not one of them has been vaccinated. We're seeing here in California a return to whooping cough, which was a childhood disease. We all had the vaccine for tetanus whooping cough, and it was eradicated. So, he said, Mr. Kennedy himself said, well, I'm not really anti-vax. He is anti-vax, and yet he said in the hearing he had his own children were vaccinated. So we want to keep the vaccine market open. Wayne doesn't either. We don't want to mandate that people get vaccines as some government agencies did during COVID. We don't want that, but we want people to have the access to these vaccines, like for shingles. I mean, Milton Friedman, when he had shingles, said it was the most painful experience, more painful than when he had a heart attack and open heart surgery. The Shingrix 2-dose vaccine is really, really helpful. I mean, I'm not saying that you should have it, Valerie, but if you want to have it and you don't want to have shingles, let's keep this market open.
Yeah, I mean, he has no evidence. The vaccines are safe. There's the benefits from the vaccine for the individual far outweigh any type of potential side effect. He's just wrong.
Well, he also made even during the hearings, after it has been disproved that the vaccine does not cause autism, that doctor in England, that Dr. Wakefield, who used fraudulent research and finally had to admit and was fired from his job that the vaccine did not cause autism, and yet Mr. Kennedy in the hearing still said vaccines cause autism, which is just not true. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much.